Hello everyone to chapter 6. Welcome. We're talking about engaging strengths. In the previous chapters, we've been talking about leadership in ways that may not always be applicable to you. Various leadership approaches, philosophies, traits, styles, theories, and types of behavior. Chances are there are some things that you've identified in yourself and other things you haven't. While I have encouraged you to apply the subjects in each chapter to yourself, it's been impersonal. We've talked about leaders in general, not so much about your individual leadership qualities. Today, that changes a bit, as we'll start to focus more on your own strengths and all that you may bring in different combinations of strengths to the table. I hope that you are all getting pretty good at predicting at least some of the study guide questions by now. Since we've read the chapter, I bet you're ready for some study guide questions focusing on strengths, and I won't disappoint you. After you've read chapter 6 in the textbook and have watched and listened to this lecture, you should be able to define what a strength is and how it's different from a trait or a skill, identify the 4 domains of leadership strengths, know what the 3 CAPP criteria for assessing strengths are, and be able to discuss the 4 quadrants of the 4M model and what they say about strengths and weaknesses. Before we dive into what this quote says, let's look at who said it. Does the name Clifton sound familiar? For those of you who took BCOM 1300 or BCOM 3300 last semester, it should. You took the Clifton Strengths Finder as part of the lab. So you also may have taken some other dive into what this quote says. Let's look at who said it. Does the name Clifton sound familiar? If you've taken the Clifton Strengths Finder, which some of you have in the past as part of the lab, it's not been required every semester, then you're already aware that Clifton focuses on strengths. So rather than weaknesses, we focus on strengths through positive psychology. When we look at what Clifton says here, a leader needs to know his strengths as a carpenter knows his tools or as a physician knows the instruments at her disposal. What great leaders have in common is that each truly knows his or her strengths and can call on the right strength at the right time. Keep this in mind as we go through the chapter. So often when you join an organization or when you are at school, you'll be asked to do something like the Clifton Strengths Finder, where you identify your 5 top strengths. You'll do the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator test. So if you've been identified as an INFP or an ENTJ, then that's what that is. It's a positive strengths assessment. Some of you love Enneagram, and you know your Enneagram type. So this is all positive psychology. Your strengths are like the tools in your toolkit. But like a carpenter or a doctor, you have to know how and when to use those tools, and that's essential to being effective. It's not enough to know that you have a strength, just like it's not enough to own a power saw or a scalpel, which could be really dangerous when used the wrong way. Knowing how to use them and when and where to use them, that's a key part of this entire approach. So, what is this strengths approach? You've probably encountered it before, as we discussed. You may have even been typed in some way, and you've thought about whether that really indicates who you are. Well, every one of us has identifiable leadership strengths, areas in which we excel or thrive, but often we fail to recognize those strengths. As a result, many times our strengths are used ineffectively or not at all. Identifying individual strengths is a unique challenge because people often feel hesitant and inhibited about acknowledging positive aspects of themselves. In a few cultures, expressing positive self-attributes is often seen as boastful or self-serving. So when I was growing up, sometimes it was seen as not proper to toot your own horn, which is kind of a phrase that means to brag about yourself. There's a phrase I heard in Australia that talks about the tallest poppies being cut down. So the people who stand up and brag, they get cut down to size. So it was encouraged not to brag. However, downplaying any success you have instinctively and having difficulty accepting a compliment means that sometimes you can't acknowledge what is good about yourself. So in many cultures, focusing on oneself is disdained. And showing humility and self-deprecation is seen as virtuous. But there are some issues there involving your own ability to assess what you're good at. So sometimes that can be a problem. Now, before we go into any further talking about strengths, let's define the term. Strength is an attribute or quality of an individual that accounts for successful performance. It is the characteristic or series of characteristics we demonstrate when our performance is at its best. Strengths are positive features of ourselves that make us effective and help us flourish. These strengths may also sound like other things we discussed in earlier chapters, like traits or skills. So how do strengths relate to the traits we talked about in Chapter 2? Traits are characteristics of people that are often inherited. In the case of strengths, these traits are being engaged at their highest level. So what about skills? Skills are learned competencies. Everyone can be taught skills. Strengths are expressions of a pre-existing capacity and are unique to each person. A skill can become a strength, just as a trait can be seen as a strength when it's engaged at its highest level. Alex Lindley outlined the strengths approach this way in his 2008 book, Average to A+, Realizing Strengths in Yourself and Others. So focus on what is going well and what is working. This is unique because often the focus that we have when we're in work or school, when we're talking to others, we focus on our weaknesses and how to improve them. Here it is how to get better at what we are already good at. So that's how the strengths approach is different. What are you good at? How can you become better at that? So if you are good at something, how can you become the best? My question to students is, people pay for the best. So if you want to be the best at something and become the best, then you can demand the paycheck that you're seeking, right? Just make sure it's something people want to pay for. Everyone has strengths. It's part of human nature. People deserve respect for their strengths. Our strengths are our greatest area of potential. To succeed, we should address weakness, but only when we are also maximizing strengths. Again, the focus is on strengths, and then you look at the weaknesses afterwards. Using our strengths is the smallest thing we can do to make the biggest difference. What are some keys to being a more effective leader? Rath and Conchi wrote the book on strengths-based leadership. Literally, it is titled Strengths-Based Leadership, Great Leaders, Great Teams, and Why People Follow. It was published in 2008, and you can get the ebook from our UTD library. I'll have a link to it. So in the recommendation section. In that book, they talk about a study where they reviewed 20,000 plus interviews with leaders and also surveyed 10,000 or more than 10,000 followers around the world. In that study, they asked people why they follow the most influential leader in their life. From these studies, they identified 3 keys to being an effective leader. The most effective leaders are always investing in strengths. Not just their own strengths, but the strengths of their employees as well, both as individuals and as teams. Studies are still looking into this, but some research shows that when people are able to use their strengths at work, they report significantly higher job satisfaction and income levels. So this was a longitudinal study. So they're looking at 25 years of information, and that's a pretty good study. If they got their sample population right and were able to, make sure that this is reputable data and it's a large enough study. So as a leader, it's good to know your strengths, but it's good to help followers learn theirs too as early as possible. And this information is in part 1 of the Rath and Conchi ebook. This is called, if you like Zig Ziglar, who died, but he was a Dallas kind of positive psychology guru. He called it sharpening the saw. Investing in your strengths was sharpening like your saw, like you're a lumberjack. Sharpening your saw isn't cutting down trees, but if you sharpen your saw, then you can cut more trees easier, right? So that's how he referred to investing in strengths, sharpening the saw. Number 2, the most effective leaders surround themselves with the right people and then maximize their team. Leaders who focus on employee strengths increase employee engagement and gains for the organization. It's not only just about the strength of individuals, but the synergistic effect of the combined strengths of the individuals that make up teams. The top performing teams have strengths in 4 domains. They are multifaceted rather than one-sided. We'll talk about this in a minute. 3, the most effective leaders understand their followers' needs. While it's not the focus of this lecture, it's interesting to note the results of a Gallup survey of more than 10,000 followers. This is detailed in part 3 of that Rath and Conchi ebook. So grab the book if you're interested. This is, what college is about. That study asked followers to describe the leader with the most positive influence in their daily life in 3 words. Here are the 4 most popular answers: trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Does all of this sound familiar? It echoes some of the things we've been talking about in other aspects of leadership. Remember relationship-oriented leadership behaviors from the last chapter, for example, in which relationship behaviors by a leader were described as supporting and developing followers, and from that gained greater employee satisfaction and potentially better employee performance? This is one way that kind of support and development might look, and why an effective leader will engage in it. Before we dive more deeply into our discussion of leadership strengths, I want to pause for a moment and focus on this quote from Rath and Conchi. Although individuals need not be well-rounded, teams should be. As we go through the domains and their associated strengths, don't think about these things only in terms of your individual strengths, but also in terms of the strengths of a group. An effective leader knows when to call on the strengths of other people on the team. Maybe you've already experienced this for yourself in group projects during college. One person does a great job as the team leader managing the project, dividing up the parts and making sure everyone turns in their parts on time. But another person steps forward in the end game to edit the entire written portion, to make sure it is formatted consistently and has consistency in person and voice and other matters, because he or she is the strongest writer on the team. Or maybe everyone contributes basic slides for a presentation, and then someone who's especially talented with PowerPoint does the same sort of thing, polishes them and tweaks them and takes them to the next level. That's what a well-rounded team that capitalizes on the individual strengths should look like. Now, you may have seen this when, as you were about to enter a team, you were asked to take a Myers-Briggs type indicator test, or an Enneagram, or Clifton Strengths Finder. They're trying to, ideally balance the strengths of the team to have a stronger team. So this activity is one that we are going to look at in class in a different format, but you should be able to think about and answer these questions like, what's your greatest strength? And then look at your teams to assess, okay, who has what strength? I'd like you to think for a moment about a common adage, which is for leaders to staff to their weaknesses. How does that relate to the material in this chapter on strengths? Be aware that we're going to talk about this in class as we discuss this chapter, and you need to have an answer. So do this and think about it and be able to come in with an answer or two and an example if you can. You recognize this particular chart from the book. It's or table, I guess I should call it. It's table 6.1, 34 talent themes. Our textbook explores several different approaches to thinking about strengths. These listings are drawn from the one that you're probably most familiar with, Gallup's research that identified the qualities of high-performing individuals. From there, they distilled this down into 34 patterns or themes that they thought did the best job of explaining excellent performance. These are the strengths you see listed here. As you may recall, StrengthsFinder defines a strength as talent times investment of skills or knowledge, which that equals a strength. From the book, and when you look at the StrengthsFinder, you know there are 4 domains of leadership strengths which help you interpret a StrengthsFinder profile: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. The book mentions that these are the 4 kinds of strengths that help create successful teams. However, teams are not always designed. As a student, I'm sure you've experienced this. In the workplace, executive teams are often formed by who has knowledge of something or competence. The smartest IT person becomes CIO. Other times, teams might be formed where people act or think like each other, formed by similarity but not by strengths or diverse ability. Rath and Conchi found that effective teams have strengths in each domain, which leads to a strong and cohesive team, as illustrated in their quote we just looked at. Usually, people will have strengths in multiple dimensions. Again, that's what helps make teams well-rounded. Here's a brief run-through of each of the 4 domains. Executing, on your left. That's the know-how to make things happen. Individuals with these skills implement solutions well. Rath and Conchi in 2008 give us some examples of this. It's on page 18 of that ebook. One leader may excel at establishing a quality process using themes such as deliberative or discipline, while the next leader will use her achiever theme to work tirelessly towards a goal. Or a leader with a strong arranger may determine the optimal configuration of people needed to complete a task. Next, we have influencing. So move one over on this table to your right, and you will see all of these strengths. Influencing means helping a team reach people beyond the team, both inside and outside the organization. Again, here are some examples from Rath and Conchi in 2008. A leader with a lot of command or self-assurance may use a few words, but her confidence will continue to project authority and win followers. In contrast, a leader using communication or woo, which sounds funny, but it kind of pulls in the charisma and that persuasiveness. So that's what woo is, that ability to really sell something with both your charisma and persuasiveness and maybe a personal relationship you establish. So if you use woo, you might get people involved by helping the individuals feel comfortable and connected to the issue at hand. Relationship building. That's the next one on this table. These individuals keep the team cohesive and foster harmony and bonding. Rath and Conchi describe these individuals with skill in the domain in this way. A leader with positivity and harmony may work hard to minimize distractions and to keep the team's collective energy high. So I've met some people with positivity and harmony, and it's so nice to work with them. They really value having a calm, happy team experience. And that's one of their highest values often as far as the team experience. So you'll know when you encounter these people, and you need to start looking for them. A leader with individualization might use a more targeted approach to getting people involved. So this is somebody who really gets to know the details of the strengths of the teams. They see each person as unique and distinctive and different and special, right? A leader with a strong relator or developer may be a great mentor and guide as he pushes others towards bigger and better achievements. Finally, strategic thinking individuals keep people focused on possibilities in the future and help with decision making. Rath and Conchi's take is thus. Within this domain, so this is that strategic thinking domain, a leader using context or strategic might explain how past events influence present circumstances or navigate the best route for future possibilities. Someone with strong ideation or input may see countless opportunities for growth based on all the information she reviews. Or a leader drawing from his analytical theme might help the team drill into the details of cause and effect. Can you see how you might not have all of these strengths in one individual? In fact, you probably would not. But how having people with different strengths from different domains could make a much better team. In addition to the Clifton Strengths Finder, which you all have experience with, the book mentions several other different approaches to strengths. I'm not going to cover all of them, but instead we'll juxtapose the Strengths Finder approach with that of the Center of Applied Positive Psychology, or CAPP. From CAPP's perspective, strengths were conceptualized as the things that we are good at and that give us energy when we're using them. Not focusing exclusively on the identification of a specific number of strengths, CAPP researchers created a more dynamic model of strengths that emphasizes the changing nature of strengths. They also examined different kinds of strengths and weaknesses. So what are the central elements? The three central elements that became the criteria in CAPP's questionnaire are performance, how good we are at doing something; energy, how much energy, how much vitality we get out of it; use, how often we're able to do it. Their strengths profiler assesses 60 strengths in relation to the three dimensions of energy, performance, and use. So sometimes we're very good at doing something, but it drains us to do it, right? So think about that in terms of your strengths. There are things that we can be good at that we don't like doing, and things that we're good at that give us more doing. And we maybe in our job get to do them all the time. So if you're very good at something, you get energy out of doing something, and you get to do it all the time, doesn't that sound like an ideal job? All right, so here's the strengths profile 4M model. CAPP research wants you to concentrate on looking at developing strengths because that is a way to more positive gains. Remember, CAPP stands for the Center of Applied Positive Psychology. This model also identifies your weaknesses and stresses knowing them well and knowing what you can do with them. However, the focus isn't about trying to develop weaknesses. Of course, if a weakness is critical to your performance in business, then you need to think about the role or area you're in. So, if that weakness that you have is part of doing the job, and to do the job well, you have to have that weakness be a strength, maybe that's a problem with the job and not with you. So maybe you need to assess your area and take your strengths somewhere else. We are more satisfied in our jobs if we're using our strengths. So, for example, I have a friend who wanted to be an accountant, but he has dyscalculia, and that's like dyslexia for numbers. So numbers switch their order around on him, and even doing homework is exhausting. He'd get a lot of things wrong. So he was very, very good in many ways in the accounting role, except those numbers, which seems important in accounting. But now this person is a trainer for sales and human resources for a large healthcare company. He uses his strengths in communication and instruction, and he's thriving. So if we're looking at the parts of this CAPP approach, let me tell you real quick, or actually not real quick, let me tell you, and you can think about it, how each of these areas work. So on the far right, where we have realized strengths, those are the personal attributes that represent our strongest assets. So these are the things you know about that you're also very good at, and they're the things that you love to do. You find them energizing. You do them a lot if you can. So if you take a strengths or skills test, these are the things that come up repeatedly. For me, they might be teaching, they might be organizing, they might be looking at the future and doing research. When I'm in the classroom and I'm interacting with you, when I'm doing research, when I'm reading and discovering new things, that's when I'm that's when I'm energized. That's what makes me happy, and I get better and better the more I do it. And I think at this point I'm very good at it when I'm in my zone. Now on the left, the unrealized strengths, that quarter of the pie, those are the personal attributes that are less visible. Right? It's energizing, you're good at, but you're not using it as much, and you should be using it more. Maybe you've run across this in your own life. You have to give a presentation for a class, and you remember how much you like getting dressed up and really nailing that presentation. When you do it, you're very good at it. So you do it, you finally, maybe do one after 2 or 3 years of not doing a presentation, and you're amazing, and you think, wow, I forgot how awesome this is. I should do this more. That's an unrealized strength, right? You are good at it, but you never think about it. You don't seek it out. Maybe you should. Now, our weaknesses, just below that, are our limited attributes. They drain our energy. They result in poor performance. Since you're not as good at these things and they suck your energy, so they take a lot of effort to do, you tend to minimize their use. Like me having to do long division without a calculator. That's definitely going to make me frustrated and cranky, and I don't enjoy doing it. Like a bear riding a bicycle, it can be done, but maybe it shouldn't be done. Learned behaviors, there to our far right, lower right, they represent those ingrained things that we've learned throughout our life experience. This is something you potentially perform well, but you should moderate its use because it drains your energy. It takes effort to do. For example, maybe you're good at addressing disputes at work and working, mediating things in a team, but man, that makes you tired and you're irritated and you're unhappy. So you don't look forward to doing it. This is a learned behavior. You do it well, but you don't like it. This is all great, but how does it work in the marketplace? Well, Aviva, which is a British multinational insurance company, used CAPP in their recruiting for customer service teams. They noticed that they were paying a high cost for each person hired, and we talked about that in class, and they had a lot of turnover. They found that people recruited based on their strengths instead of their experience were more likely to stay with the company for longer, were more productive, and got higher customer satisfaction results. So I'll have a link to that study so you can look it over in our class. But I think it's worth recognizing that this is not a bad approach to building teams and to making sure the people that you have are in the right jobs. But how can we spot those strengths? Since they're so varied, they might look differently in different people. We all have unique personality traits, and therefore we all have unique strengths. Now, probability suggests that there is at least one of you watching this now thinking, well, what if you have no strengths? Okay, no one is without strengths. As suggested by psychologist Howard Gardner, extraordinary individuals are distinguished less by their impressive raw power than by their ability to identify their strengths and then exploit them. Maybe at this point you're asking yourself, but how do I know what my strengths are? The book recommends the following. First, take tests like StrengthsFinder or VIAIS or R2 Strengths Profiler that are available online. That's one way to start to hone in on your strengths. It's a good place to start. Second, you can fill out the Leadership Strengths Questionnaire. Third, you can complete the Reflected Best Self exercise, RBSE. Fourth, you can complete the Discovering Your Strengths exercise. And fifth, you can engage in a self-assessment of what you believe to be your strongest attributes. But listed on the slide are some of the more intuitive ways to spot your strengths. So just living your life and thinking about who you are, you can start to spot these as you go about your day. Usually, a strength is a feeling of energy and engagement coupled with losing a sense of time passing. This is often called flow. So have you ever heard somebody say, I got into the flow and like a couple of hours passed and I didn't even realize it? This can also happen when you're intensely playing a video game. It's that sweet spot of enjoying what you're doing and feeling challenged that you don't even notice how much time is going by. That's a strength. Rapid learning. When you pick up something quickly, repeated successful performance over and over and over, you do well on this. Good completion of tasks, an attraction for certain tasks, or pleasure from performing certain tasks. So if you like it, it's probably a strength. Our leadership capability is enhanced when we're able to discover our fully utilized strengths, underutilized strengths, and weaknesses. Discovering your strengths requires you to concentrate on your positive attributes and those times when you feel inspired. To do so, you need to pay attention to your successes rather than focusing on your weaknesses or failures. So get over it. You are good at a lot of things. You might struggle, but recognize where you're really good. If you've ever tried to develop your physical strength, you know you generally can't just walk into a gym for the first time and bench press 100 pounds. You can't run a 5K without working up to it first or knock out 100 pull-ups. But if you can, then that's good for you and you're amazing and I am very jealous. Developing your leadership strengths is also a multifaceted process that involves several steps. First, you need to acknowledge your strengths and be prepared to reveal them to others. Telling others about our strengths is important because it lets them know how we can be most useful when working or collaborating together, clarifying the unique contributions we can make to others and their work. In essence, disclosing strengths declares, this is what I bring to the table, this is what I'm best at, and this is what I can do for you. And that allows others to know what they can expect from us. In essence, we have to create an elevator pitch for ourselves that expresses to others what we can do for them and why we are valuable. And this also allows us to be placed in the right circumstances to excel, to succeed. So knowing your strengths allows you to succeed more because when you communicate them and make sure you're in the right situation, then you're going to be more successful and like your job better. So think about working on a team. If you all can talk about the things you really do best, not pretending, not lying, but what do you do best on a group project, and you can use those strengths to make a better project more easily, then you won't have the person who's great with Excel slaving away on the introduction instead of the tables, or the person who's a great writer trying to build all the PowerPoint slides. Put the right person in the right position to be successful, and then work as a team to make that success even better. There are a lot of ways to go about revealing your strengths. Some people post them on social media. Some people, have that elevator pitch. In fact, all of you should have an elevator pitch that's in your head. So if someone ever asks you In a job interview or at a moment's notice, what you're great at, you can talk about it and sound like you're not bragging or even humble bragging, but you're basing your strengths on real experiences and achievements. So that's our goal for you, to give you that information. Disclosing our strengths to others does not need to be daunting or embarrassing. You can be simple and straightforward. So just like your driver's license states your hair and eye color and whether you have corrected lenses or not as facts, without judgment, you can talk about your strengths in a no-nonsense way if you've explored your experiences with them and created legitimate achievements that other people can look at and acknowledge as achievements. So now's your time. Have I lit a fire under you yet? Now, is anyone feeling uncomfortable with this idea of adding your strengths publicly and acknowledging them publicly? Please be aware of how this works as far as blowing your own horns, tooting your own horns in different cultures. So if you're communicating across cultures, it's a very Western thing to say straightforwardly, here is what I'm best at. So while some cultures see a strength as something to be revealed, others see it as something to keep hidden. So if you go into other cultures, think carefully about how you deal with and acknowledge and express your strengths in discussing them. But in Western culture, we tend to be, particularly when there's evidence to support our strengths, we tend to be pretty blunt about them. And we try not to, hopefully, sound like we're bragging. We try to sound like this is a strength based on previous experience and achievement. Now, a good example of practicing strengths is Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in the world. So if you look up Warren Buffett, you'll see, so I would urge you to Google all these people so you're familiar if you don't know them. He's known for patience, practicality, and how truthful and trustworthy he is. He used those strengths to make Berkshire Hathaway successful. Clearly, he recognized his strengths and he carved out a role for himself that allowed himself to practice those strengths every day. He is distinct. He's not like other investors, and that has played, a great role for him in his life. I wish the same for you. Leaders must not only recognize and capitalize on their strengths, but also be able to identify their weaknesses and address them. Acknowledging and understanding your weaknesses can allow you to work on improving them and recognizing situations where your weaknesses can be a liability to your leadership. To continue the physical strength metaphor, maybe you want to do pull-ups, but you have weak back muscles because you've only been focusing on your biceps, triceps, and pectoral muscles, the ones you can see in the mirror. So you've been all about the looks and not about the actual ability and strengths. So now you need to change your approach. If you improve those previously neglected muscles, all of a sudden you're going to improve your pull-ups, but you're going to have a host of other benefits like less back pain. You're going to improve your core. You're going to be able to do other things that you couldn't do previously. So working to improve your weaknesses can have a similar benefit. It can make your strengths stronger and better. It can make you more capable across the board. So another way to address weaknesses, especially ones that can't be easily improved, is to use them as opportunities for others to contribute their strengths to improve your leadership. So staff to your weaknesses, right? Find people who help you shine because they can do that work much better than you ever could. Leaders need to recognize and engage the strengths of their followers. They need to determine what followers are good at doing and help them do it. The strengths of followers are not always evident to leaders, however, and even the followers themselves, as we've discussed before in the unrealized strengths portion. This becomes challenging because leaders need to ascertain followers' strengths from what they observe rather than what followers explicitly express to them. So think about the coach who watches everyone work out and then has you do some exercises and then tells you, you have a strength in this, and you're surprised. Oh my gosh, I never realized it. That is kind of the role of some leaders, looking for those unrealized strengths. High-performing teams and work groups possess strengths in 4 domains: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. When leaders become aware of their followers' strengths as well as their own, they can use this information to design work groups that have individuals with strengths representing each of the domains. So once again, you look and staff knowing the strengths and knowing what people bring to the team, but sometimes it's not always obvious. So think about complementary strengths. A team that's built with complementary strengths in mind means that some groups have members whose strengths complement other members. And so it's well-roundedness. That results in a much more effective team. Such teams, by their very nature, are able to do things that individuals and non-complementary teams can't. So if everybody on your team has similar strengths, you're going to be weaker in the long run, right? Well, this also can raise some issues. Too much overlap in the Venn diagram of team members' skill sets can result in competition rather than a complementary situation. If a team is composed of people with complementary strengths and has a common vision, aligned incentives, and close communication, as well as trust among the team members, there can be a synergistic effect where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. What is that called? That's the gestalt, right? So that's when you have that whole greater than the sum of its parts, and you have synergy. Work climate and physiological impact. Research suggests that when employees have the opportunity to engage their strengths, they're more productive and more loyal, and their companies experience less turnover. In short, people literally feel better. They are healthier and they work better when the work climate in which they work is positive and they feel good about what they're doing there. So how does a leader go about making a positive climate? By attending to 4 areas. To create a positive climate, leaders should foster among their employees virtues such as compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude. For relationships, highlight individuals' positive images and strengths rather than their negative images and weaknesses. So don't harp on the negative all the time. Build people up, right? And let them trust that you are looking at them and seeing the good things, right? For communication, to develop that positive communication, be supportive. Make more positive than negative statements and be less negatively evaluative of others. There's actually research that shows that for every negative comment, it takes 6 positive comments for the person to essentially psychologically kind of balance out and not attribute that negativity to the workplace itself. So if you are going to criticize someone, think very carefully about how you want them to perceive their workplace and what your goal is with that negative comment. You do want to have enough interaction with them that their entire experience with the team and with the organization is not your negative comments trying to get them on track. Now, meaning, if you want to foster positive meaning in your organization, emphasize the connection between employees' values and the long-term impact of their work. We're going to talk more about establishing climate in Chapter 8. Finally, the study guide questions. Here we are. Take some time to answer these questions in your notes, but also think about how this material applies to your life. All of us have strengths that help us as leaders and as part of a team. Understanding what our strengths are, how we can best use them both alone and as part of a team, and what the strengths are of all your team members and followers can help make us more informed and effective leaders. I hope this helps. This is a key part of our class, and this is applicable to you as you go out in the world and become a manager, a team leader, a business owner, a startup founder. You're going to want to think carefully about this and the teams that you've created. Bye.